In this story, we will follow a trail of arrows, a descent that will keep you on the edge of your seat. Without giving away any spoilers, rest assured this story will leave you questioning everything you thought you knew. So, grab a snack, settle in, and enjoy. If you like the story, please subscribe so you don't miss the next one. When I was in a pub on Long Island, I went to use the restrooms. When I was in the stall, I saw writing on the door that said, "Follow the arrows." I looked around, but I didn't see any arrows. Whatever, I didn't think about it. Then, about a month after that, I'm back in the same place, using the restroom to wash my hands before I tear into some buffalo wings. They were out of paper towels, and not wanting to touch the restroom door with my hands, I tried to open it with my elbows. This was a clumsy process and resulted in me bumping a light switch with my elbow. The room went completely dark. Or did it? On the ceiling, I noticed a trail of glow-in-the-dark arrows painted onto the ceiling. They were very faded, looking like they'd been there for quite a while. They led out the door. I had totally forgotten about the graffiti I had read a month ago, so I didn't really think about those arrows at all. I just pulled my sleeve over my wet hand, used it to flip the switch back on, and opened the door. I went back to my table with some buddies, and we chowed down on some excellent wings. It wasn't until the end of the evening when my brain, out of nowhere, remembered the "Follow the Arrows" graffiti in the stall. I excused myself from the table just to check if it was this stall where I saw the writing. It was. Now I had a mystery. I wanted to follow the arrows, but I couldn't. After I left the restroom, the ambient light was so bright that the arrows were invisible. I told my friends about the arrows, and I asked the bartender about it. He knew about the graffiti but had never seen the glow-in-the-dark arrows. After about 15 minutes of pouring drinks, he took a minute to go check it out. He didn't seem that impressed. I asked him if we could stay after closing and turn off all the lights to see where it went. He said yes. Flash forward 2 hours. The bartender and some of the waitresses are all standing around in the dark of the bar, looking at little faded arrows that make a trail from the restroom out to the front door. We step outside, but the trail is dead. The street lights outside make the faded glow-in-the-dark arrows impossible to see, if they were even there at all. 3 days later, I'm in Geology 101 at my college when I notice the display of exotic minerals that the department has in a display case. Inside the case is a small handheld black light used by rockhounds to find and observe glow-in-the-dark minerals. After class, I ask the professor if I can borrow it. He says yes, but if I break it, I owe the department $45. I drag my buddies back to the bar. We have some more drinks and awesome buffalo wings. When we're done gorging ourselves, it is already dark outside. I went to the bathroom and tested my black light on some of the painted arrows. It worked like a charm. They glowed incredibly brightly, and even with the lights on, they were fairly visible. I went back to the table. We pay our tab and step onto the street. My friends stood around me, trying to look cool, while I was geeking out with my black light, searching for invisible arrows on the ground. I found one. I followed the arrow, keeping my black light inches from the ground, waving it back and forth. 5 feet away, I found another arrow, then another, and another still. I was following these arrows down a sidewalk for about 2 blocks. My friends finally loosened up and started speculating on where the hell these arrows were taking us. Finally, I got to an arrow pointing us in a new direction. It was a driveway leading to an empty commercial lot of some kind. The lot was surrounded by cyclone fences with aluminum siding. We couldn't see what was inside. The arrows led us around the fence wall to a gate. I saw a lot of glow-in-the-dark paint under my light, and it took me a few seconds and some swinging of the light to realize we were looking at a giant arrow pointing inside the fence. Jeff pushed on the gate. It was locked, and it rattled terribly in the dark. Dave looked uncomfortable. He took a deep breath, and before he could say what I'm certain he was about to, I cut him off, saying, "Let's do it." Jeff didn't even say anything before he leapt against the gate, getting a firm handhold at the top. Ungracefully, but successfully, he pulled himself to an uncomfortable straddle on top of the gate. I followed suit, leaping at the gate. I didn't reach the top on my first attempt. I put the black light in my pocket and took a running leap at the gate. I got a firm handhold, but I could feel the metal digging into my skin. I made a mental note to get a tetanus shot when this was all over. Jeff helped me up from the top while Dave pushed my legs from underneath. Dave followed next with surprising ease. From our perch on the gate, we could see that the fence surrounded what looked like an old parking lot. Grass and other green things sprang up from the ancient, crumbled asphalt. Immediately below us, on the other side of the fence, was nothing but inky blackness from the shadow cast by the gate from a nearby street lamp. I pulled my black light from my pocket, but from this height, it was useless. To my surprise, Dave was the first one to slide down into the dark. He slid down the fence as low as possible before letting go and taking the final plunge. We heard him stumble, curse quietly, then stand. "It's okay," he said. "I can see a little. It's just asphalt." Jeff and I dropped down from the fence. I didn't see exactly what happened, but after a lot of cursing, Jeff announced that he had busted his knee. After a minute of silent deliberation, he decided we should soldier on. I pulled out my light and quickly found an arrow. We followed a new trail slowly, and it quickly became clear that we were being led to a small shack in the middle of the parking lot. Dave paused, scanning the dimly lit ruins around him. This all used to be a drive-in movie theater. He gestured toward the crumbling structure ahead, recognizing it as the concession stand. Jeff and I agreed that this was a pretty good theory. We walked to the building, and as we got closer, saw that it was boarded up. But the shape of it and its enormous ply-board-covered windows made us think that Dave was probably right. Jeff pulled out a cell phone and held it high above his head. At first, I couldn't figure out why. Then it became clear that he was using it as a flashlight to illuminate some faded lettering on the wall. We couldn't really see it, but we decided it probably said popcorn. I held up my black light. It glowed purple and bright, but didn't help us read the lettering any better than Jeff's phone had. I scanned the ground for more arrows and found none. Dave shrugged, a hint of skepticism in his expression. "So what? Did they used to lure people to buy popcorn?" Jeff nodded, confirming his thoughts. We walked around the building until we came to a door in the back. It was secured by an old combination padlock. My black light hung from a tie on my wrist. I thought I had shut it off now that our mystery was solved, but out of the corner of my eye, I caught a glimpse of glowing paint. I aimed my light at it. There, on the door, in sharp and new glowing paint, was scrawled 1356. Holding the black light close, we quickly rotated the wheels on the lock. Jeff pulled it open with a satisfying click. Pulling the padlock aside, we pushed on the old door. It creaked ominously and got stuck when it was about a third of the way open. Jeff kicked his foot around the inside and moved an obstruction with a thud. The door opened halfway now, and Jeff peeked inside. It was dark. He couldn't see anything. I peeked inside the door, shining my black light. It was useless. I cursed myself for not bringing a real flashlight. A black light and a cell phone were not enough to explore in there. Dave took his turn peering in. Just as I was about to suggest we head back to return another day, I heard a click, and a dim light appeared within the building. Dave's eyes widened in disbelief as he stared at the now lit room. Jeff took a step back, surveying the scene with a mixture of amazement and disbelief. This place looked like it had been out of use for at least 30 years. Look at this parking lot. There are trees growing right through the cracks. "Someone's still paying the bills," I said, pushing Dave to get him headed into the building. We walked in and saw a surprisingly clean concession stand interior. There was a thin coating of that strange sort of dust that accumulates in the absence of people, the sort of dust you would expect to find in an ancient tomb. The shelves were empty, and a cabinet stood on the far side of the room, doors closed. Dave walked to it and opened it cautiously. "Holy goat fucker," he said. He always had an interesting way with words. I looked past him to see what had impressed him. "Jesus," I agreed. We were looking at shelves and shelves packed with candy boxes. But not just any candy boxes. Really old stuff. I recognized Cracker Jacks and Hershey's, but the labels were ancient. I dropped my black light on the floor and grabbed excitedly for a giant box of Necco wafers. Before I could examine further, Jeff pointed down. He was standing over a hatch in the floor. He'd pulled it up and was peering into the dark, hoping there is another light down there. He bounded down a set of steps into the cellar. Dave and I followed close behind, trying to find a switch along the way. If I hadn't been in such a hurry to keep up with Jeff, I might have noticed that the black light I had dropped was illuminating some more glowing paint. And if I had noticed that, I might also have noticed that the paint made an arrow pointing directly toward this basement hatch. And if I had noticed that, it might have given me pause. But I did not notice these things. I was halfway to the bottom of the stairs when I heard a click. My eyes were immediately drawn to a glow in the corner of the basement. Jeff found it. We walked toward the light, bumping into empty shelves and some strange debris along the way. Canvas bags, like sacks of potatoes. They were covered in dust. I was more concerned with the shelf under the light. It held what I recognized as old film canisters. Truly, these were treasure. We hurried over, reading the titles. Lots of things with monsters. Dracula Returns, Night of the Wolf People. Great stuff. But I didn't recognize any of the titles. We all jumped when we heard it. There was a whirring sound, very loud, coming from near the stairs. It sounded somehow familiar, like a garbage disposal or some electric power tool. We saw the shadows changing from the light in the hatchway. We had nearly knocked over the shelf with the film reels. I had involuntarily thrown my hands over my ears. Dave and Jeff had comical, frightened expressions on their faces. I probably looked the same. At last, the sound stopped. We stood still for a moment, our hearts beating hard in our chests. Then, as if awakening from a trance, we all ran over to the hatch to investigate. My mind could not comprehend what it saw. Was the ceiling upstairs covered in black stripes? No, my eyes finally had understood. The hatch we had just come down moments ago was now blocked by iron bars. Jeff bolted up the stairs as far as he could, grasping the iron bars in his hands and pushing against them violently. But his shaking and jarring only served to rattle the creaky wooden staircase. Dave stood there, pale and dumb, staring at the bars, his mind trying to comprehend this impossible situation. I walked to the back of the stairs and saw the motorized contraption attached to the iron bars. It was so dark, though, that I could barely make it out. I reached for my black light, realizing that I had left it upstairs. Jeff stood next to me and looked at the contraption. He held up his cell phone, and in the phone's dim light, we saw a giant metal box that had been cleverly mounted to the basement ceiling. If there were a way to access this device, we could not see it. Dave gasped suddenly and ran to one of the potato sacks I'd seen on the floor. He dragged it into the light, working to untie it. When he was done, I saw him look into the bag and make a sound I'd never heard before, something between a scream and a moan. He started hyperventilating. Jeff and I ran over to him. Jeff said some comforting words to Dave while I looked into the bag. At first, I couldn't tell what I was looking at. For some reason, I thought it was tree roots or some sort of stew vegetables. Then I saw the hair. I vomited violently, away from the others. I tried to speak, but vomited again. Throat raw, I managed to choke out a frantic plea to Jeff. "Your phone. Call the police. Call them now." I put my hand on Dave's shoulder. Dave, who was slowly rocking back and forth like a baby. He was trying to slow down his breathing, but it was coming quickly in gasping rasps. I heard Jeff get through to someone on the phone. He explained where the bar was, and how we had walked several blocks to a parking lot with a fence around it. He explained the concession stand, the basement, and the locking iron bars. They wanted him to stay on the line. I asked him for the phone. "Look," I said, "there are dead bodies in bags down here." I looked around. Oh, dozens of them. It was a woman on the other end. She said, "Just stay calm. I want you to stay on the line with me and give me your names." We told her who we were and answered her checklist of questions. I knew we should conserve the phone batteries, but she was our lifeline out of this crazy situation. After we'd answered all her questions, she said, "You know, Making prank calls to emergency rescue services is a very serious crime. My blood turned cold. She thought we were joking. My throat tightened. As calmly as I could, I had croaked, "Ma'am, I swear to you, I have never been more serious in my life. Please send someone down here. If we're lying, you can arrest us. Just send someone, please." She hung up. Dave grabbed the phone out of my hands, and I saw him dial the operator. I noticed he had calmed down significantly. In a moment, he spoke. Calmly, he said, "Operator, I'd like to speak to New Hyde Park Police, please." "Yes, it is an emergency." There was a moment's silence. Then he spoke in a deep, calm voice. "I'd like to report some kids in an abandoned building. I saw them drag a girl in there, into the basement. It sounds awful bad. Someone needs to hurry before they hurt that girl." Dave, freaking brilliant Dave. I could have kissed him. He gave the officer the exact location of the lot and a perfect description. After answering a few more of the officer's questions, he begged her once again to hurry. But already I heard the sound of a car pulling up outside. Dave hung up the phone. We all looked at each other in relief. I heard a car door open, then close, followed by heavy footsteps. Jeff ran to the barred hatch. We began shouting and banging on the bars, trying to grab their attention. The footsteps were slow and deliberate overhead. I saw a pair of work boots and dirty blue jeans appear at the top of the stairs. Jeff stepped clumsily backward down the stairs, looking pale. I moved to the base of the stairs beside him and looked up. The man standing there didn't look like a police officer. He resembled more of a bear, intimidatingly large. He was smoking a cigarette, staring at us without really seeing us, like we were just shirts on a hanger, and he was trying to decide which one to wear. "Excuse me," I said, but he walked away as if he hadn't heard me.
"Hey!"
I screamed as I ran up the stairs to the bars, but no other words came to mind. He walked outside. We heard him get something heavy out of his vehicle, then heard him dragging it inside. Whatever it was, he set it down with a thump. There was some fussing about upstairs, and then we saw a plastic tarp rolled across the iron bars. Moments later, the sound of duct tape. The hatch was closed, and we were alone, listening to the sounds of the man working. Working, we were sure, on something evil. The kind of evil that you rarely see. The kind of evil you don't get to tell anyone about later. A high-pitched, steady hissing sound followed. I was confused, and so was Jeff. Dave suddenly spoke up, saying that he is pumping gas into the room. We ran around, looking for the source, but we were lightheaded within minutes. I heard Jeff collapse in the far corner. Dave rushed over and tried to pull him toward me. Dave fell about 10 feet away from me, breathing shallowly, unconscious, but not dead. I heard sirens in the distance, and then there was nothing. When I awoke, I realized two things about my face. The first was that it hurt a lot. The second was that it was on a concrete floor. I tried to sit up, but as I pushed myself off the ground, my arms gave out. I was so weak. My head felt like it weighed 100 pounds. Behind me, I heard grunting and coughing. Startled, I rolled over and saw Dave as he began to come around. For a moment, I was confused, glancing around the dusty room. Then, it all snapped into place. Adrenaline kicked in, and my muscles found new strength. I grabbed Dave's collar, telling him, "We've got to get the I stopped mid-sentence when I heard voices upstairs. "Excuse me, sir. We've had reports of a disturbance out here. Have you heard anything unusual?" But the man didn't get a chance to answer because I started screaming in bloody murder. Dave joined me. Jeff stirred, but I was too busy running up the stairs and pounding on the hatch to pay him any attention. Dave grabbed a couple of metal film canisters and smashed them together, making an unholy racket. If there was any more dialogue exchanged upstairs, we didn't hear it. What we did hear was a scuffle. The men upstairs slammed each other into the walls. One of them fell to the floor with a heavy thud. There was a gunshot, then another. Finally, we heard a second body slump to the ground. We stayed silent for a moment, praying the police officer had won, but we heard nothing. "Officer!" I shouted through the hatch. There was a moan. Then, I think I'm hurt. I think... and then nothing. "Officer?" I shouted again and pounded on the hatch, but there was no response. Jeff and Dave were behind me at the base of the stairs. More stirring came from the direction of the second thud upstairs. I was pretty sure it was our captor. My heart pounded. In the dark of the basement, I heard something smash. I turned to see Dave destroying a metal shelf. He ripped off a sturdy, narrow metal support and ran up the stairs to join me. Dave wedged the metal piece through the iron bars and pushed upward against the hatch. In the process, he tore a small rip in the tarp that had been duct taped over the opening. I immediately began clawing at the thick plastic like a crazed cat. Jeff followed Dave's lead, grabbed another piece of the destroyed shelf, wedged it between the iron bars, and pushed. We heard the welcome groan of bending wood, followed by a delightful snap. The hatch, along with part of its frame, swung upward a few inches. It was clear something was on top of it. I pushed through the bars with my bare hands as Jeff and Dave redoubled their efforts. We heard something heavy and metallic crash to the side. The hatch door swung open, allowing us to see the scene above. A police officer lay several feet away from where we stood. Something was sticking out of the side of his head, a kitchen knife. It was ghastly. The worst part was his eyes. They were alert. He was looking at me. It was clear he couldn't speak. His right hand, still clutching a small revolver, trembled in a rhythmic spasm. The officer kept shifting his eyes from my face to a point behind me. He did it twice before I understood. I turned to look where he wanted me to. Against the far wall, the large bear of a man was trying to pull himself upright, using the wall for support. He had been shot in the leg and shoulder. He looked pale but determined. I reached out for the officer's gun. His eyes pleaded with me, but he couldn't hand it to me. His mouth opened and closed like a fish, and awful gibberish poured out. Something that wanted to be words, but were spilling from a dying brain. I stretched my arm to its limit, feeling the iron bars dig into my flesh. My fingertip grazed the barrel of the gun, but I couldn't quite reach it. The cop made another horrible sound and flexed his torso. His body lurched closer to me, and I gripped the gun firmly. I pulled it from his hand and quickly reoriented myself, pointing it at the large man. The bars made it difficult, and by the time I had my arm aimed, my view was obstructed by the open hatch door resting on top of some contraption. Gas canisters, maybe. I ducked down with Dave and Jeff. I told them I've got the cop's gun. Told them he's got a knife in his head. The big guy's still there. I counted the bullets and realized we had only 4 shots left. Dave whispered we could get under him and try to shoot him through the floor. We heard the large man groan and move closer to the hatch. I aimed the gun in the direction I thought he might appear. Dave left the stairs and circled around underneath, where he thought the man might be. We heard the clanking of metal canisters, and I watched as a large cylindrical container was pulled toward where I knew the man to be. I aimed through the hatchway door and fired a shot. The sound was deafening, and the kickback from the small gun was much more than I expected. My ears rang, and there was a sharp pain in my wrist. There was silence from the other side of the open hatch door, and then movement, more frantic this time. I heard cursing and something that sounded like the valve of a garden hose turning. The hissing sound returned, the gas again. Jeff and Dave both dashed to the top of the stairs with me. We all tried dislodging the iron bars. Without words, we synchronized our motions, pushing, pulling, twisting, jarring, until finally it gave. Not much, just an inch. We couldn't tell what had moved. We just knew that when we pulled on the iron bars now, they shifted back and forth. All the while, an ominous hissing filled the air. I felt as though we were trapped in a snake pit. I could smell it a little now, the strange odor that had overtaken me earlier. I stuck my face up to the bars and inhaled a lungful of untainted air. Dave and Jeff followed suit. We all ripped fiercely at the bars, and at last, I could see the whole clever device as it was pried from the basement ceiling. It must have been 8 to 10 feet long. Dave saw it too, but he must have understood something that I did not, because he told me to pull when he pulls. He took a lungful of good air and ran down the stairs to the far end of the contraption. He leapt at it, yanking hard at some unseen element in the ceiling. Jeff and I put all our weight on the bars, and at long last, the enormous contraption fell. Dave took a step or two back toward us, but collapsed as the gas overtook him. I was starting to get tunnel vision as Jeff and I tried to push the dislodged iron bars and their frame out of the way of the hatch. We did so with moderate success. Half the hatchway was clear. Jeff was in a better position, so he climbed out first. My head was spinning now, and then I saw the huge man spring out from his hiding place and clobber Jeff with some sort of wrench. I was having trouble thinking. I wanted to shoot this man. Where had I put the gun? I didn't see it. There was no time. I needed air. I pulled myself out of the hatch and inhaled deeply twice. My perceptions were dulled from the gas, so I didn't expect the blow as his boot slammed into my already injured face. I tumbled down the stairs, but found my footing near the bottom. And then, a miracle. At the foot of the stairs was the revolver. I must have dropped it in the frenzy to pry the bars loose. I grabbed for the gun and involuntarily inhaled a deep breath of the powerful gas. The world collapsed around me. I could not see, but I still felt the gun in my hand and the stairs beneath my feet. I charged upward, shooting wildly into the dark. I heard a grunt and felt myself run into the open hatchway door. The exertion was too much. I tumbled forward, spiraling down and down into nothingness. When I awoke, I was being loaded into an ambulance. I grabbed the arm of a paramedic who was lifting me in. I asked, "Where are my friends?" but the paramedic just gave me a sad look and shook her head. They finished loading me in and slammed the doors. I closed my eyes, too weary to think. I drifted back into unconsciousness. 1 year later, there was a memorial service at my school. I showed up with a girl I'd been seeing for a couple of months. A real sweetheart. I think you'd approve. I was wearing my best suit, and in my hand was a sweaty piece of paper with my idea for a speech on it. I walked to the podium and cleared my throat. I said a few words about how I met Dave and what a great guy he was. I told them all how he'd charged into a room full of potentially deadly gas to help Jeff and me escape from a madman. My voice sounded funny through the speakers. The damage to my face was extensive. I'd had 2 surgeries, with 1 more scheduled for the fall. I looked okay, but it affected the way I talked. When I was done speaking, I walked over to Dave's family and hugged his mother. She didn't want to let me go. Dave's father patted me on the shoulder as he choked back a sob. I walked back to my seat. "Stop looking around," my girlfriend scolded. I pretended I didn't know what she was talking about. "You knew he wasn't coming," she said. "I know," I replied. When we got back to my dorm room, Jeff was waiting on the front steps. The blow he took to the head had knocked out the vision in his left eye. "I couldn't go," he said. "I'm sorry." I nodded, and we all went inside. We heated up some lunch on our contraband hot plate and turned on the television for background noise. My girlfriend flipped to the news channel and watched a report on the memorial. We'd seen the cameras there covering the event live. The reporter told our story of Dave, who gave his life, of Jeff, who lost an eye and any ability he ever had to do long division, and of me. She went on to mention Officer Stanley Bell, who died that night, leaving a wife and 2 children. She talked about the concession stand and how it was rigged with motion sensors to capture the curious in a dungeon of death, and how the killer had rigged those motion sensors to the telephone lines so that his phone would ring 3 times when someone entered his trap. She talked about the 37 bodies in canvas sacks that had been accumulating since 1957. Then they showed the artist's rendering of the man I described to her as a bear of a man. He is still at large, identity unknown. I inhaled slowly and closed my eyes. I tried to remind myself that I was one of the lucky ones. I went to lay down in my room and take a nap. My girlfriend followed me a minute later and curled around me. Thank you for staying with me until the end, and I really hope you enjoyed the story. If you liked it, don't forget to subscribe so you won't miss out on the next one. Your support really helps, and I can't wait to share more with you soon. Stay safe, and see you in the next one.